is in contact with the parties, urging them to exercise maximum restraint and utilize the mission's liaison and coordination mechanisms to prevent further risks of escalation and loss of life. In addition to leadership being in constant contact with the authorities, both in Lebanon and in Israel since the events began, UN peacekeepers in Lebanon have remained present along the blue line to maintain stability. They've also adapted and enhanced their presence throughout the area of operations, including counter-rocket launching capabilities. Our humanitarian colleagues, just turning to Gaza, our humanitarian colleagues report over 120,000 people have been internally displaced in Gaza due to concerns over the protection and destruction of homes. You've heard the Secretary General on what we're seeing already in Gaza. 6 healthcare workers have also been killed and 4 others were injured, with 7 healthcare facilities and 9 ambulances damaged. In Gaza, damage to water, sanitation, and hygiene facilities has undermined services to more than 400,000 people. The Gaza power plant is now the only source of electricity and could run out of fuel within days. Also, as of today, the World Food Program has begun distributing food to up to 100,000 internally displaced Gazans who are seeking refuge in UNRWA shelters with fresh bread and canned food. In the next few days, the WFP plans on starting to roll out assistance to up to 800,000 people with food and cash assistance as the situation develops, provided the necessary funding is made available. WFP needs $16.8 million to reach 805,000 people in the next month. For its part, UNRWA says they're sheltering about 137,000 people in 83 of its schools in all areas of the Gaza Strip. An UNRWA school sheltering displaced families in the Gaza Strip was directly hit over the weekend. The school was severely damaged. It was housing about 225 people, though no casualties were recorded among the displaced, but the school sustained significant and structural damage. All UNRWA schools across the Gaza Strip are closed. More than 300,000 students are impacted. Okay, just moving on to Afghanistan. We, along with our humanitarian partners, are now ramping up to the response following the 6.3 magnitude earthquake which struck Herat province in the west of the country on Saturday. Our humanitarian colleagues note that the epicenter of the earthquake was in Zindanjan district, where reports indicate that 100% of the homes have been destroyed. According to community-level assessments, nearly 1,300 people have died and 1,700 were injured in Zindanjan province. In total, an estimated more than 12,000 men, women, and children have been impacted across the 5 districts in Herat province. Several hundred households have been also displaced to Herat city. The figure is likely to rise in the coming days as search and rescue efforts and assessments continue. We've deployed assessment teams, and we are providing emergency shelter supplies, blankets, warm clothes, food, hygiene kits, water buckets, chlorine, and dignity kits to those who need it. Our partners have also deployed health teams and are providing trauma and emergency surgery kits. The humanitarian coordinator for Afghanistan, Danielle Andres, has approved an emergency reserve allocation from the Afghan Humanitarian Fund of $5 million to support the immediate relief efforts in the earthquake-impacted areas. This morning, the Security Council heard from Rosemary DiCarlo, the Undersecretary General for Political and Peacebuilding Affairs. She noted that in recent weeks, civilians and civilian infrastructure across Ukraine have remained under nearly constant fire. Ms. DiCarlo also said the immediate impact of such attacks is just as clear as the fact that international humanitarian law obligates parties to armed conflict to protect non-combatants. She stressed that we will not waver in calling for accountability for anyone responsible for harming civilians during hostilities. Also briefing was Joyce Misuya, the number 2 at the Department of Humanitarian Affairs. She said since the attack on Hosa, the UN and humanitarian organizations have been on the scene alongside local Ukrainian authorities to ensure that people receive some support in face of these atrocious attacks. Ms. Masuya warned that winter is yet again upon the people of Ukraine, adding that it is disturbing to see that attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure have already been reported over the past weeks. Both remarks have been shared with you. Turning to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, our peacekeeping colleagues there are telling us that they are reinforcing their presence in Kinshasa in North Kivu province to protect civilians caught in clashes between the M23 and members of other armed groups. Over the weekend, fresh fighting between these groups forced tens of thousands of people to flee their homes. Approximately 2,000 people have sought refuge within the UN's missions base at Kinshasa, and 18,000 men, women, and children have taken shelter just outside the base. For its part, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs says that since the 1st of October, clashes in Masisi territory, North Kivu, have displaced nearly 85,000 people. This brings the total number of displaced in the province to more than 2 million. These newly uprooted people have sought refuge in safer locations, including in other parts of Masisi territory and in Rutshuru. They've settled with host families or sheltering at collective centers. Most of them are living in very precarious conditions, as one can only imagine. As a result of the clashes, road traffic is restricted between Goma and Kinshasa. Many of our humanitarian partners have suspended their movements to Kinshasa and the surrounding area as a result of the fighting. Turning to Somalia, the humanitarian coordinator there tells us that about 100,000 people have been impacted by last week's heavy rains and flash floods in the southern district of Baidoa. Shelters for more than 86,000 internally displaced people in 136 settlements were submerged, with most of them still flooded as we speak. In addition to shelter support, people impacted by the floods need food, water, and medical care. Our humanitarian colleagues tell us that El Nino is expected to bring more rains and more flooding to Somalia through December, with at least 1.2 million people in riverine areas likely to be impacted by those heavy rains and flooding. We, along with our humanitarian partners, have worked with the government to develop emergency preparedness and response plans, and the Somalia Fund has allocated $15 million for early action on flooding. But additional resources are urgently needed. This year's humanitarian appeal for Somalia is just 37% funded. And turning to Ethiopia, World Food Program says it has begun rolling out food distribution to nearly 900,000 refugees in Ethiopia following a full revamp of safeguards and controls at its refugee operations. Families living in refugee camps across 5 regions, including new arrivals who fled from Sudan, are receiving food parcels for the first time since WFP paused food distribution in June of this year following reports of large-scale diversions of humanitarian supplies. WFP said around 35,000 people who fled from Sudan to Ethiopia in the last 6 months urgently require food assistance, while Ethiopia also hosts a further 850,000 refugees, mostly from Somalia, South Sudan, and Eritrea. The resumption of food distribution for refugees follows major reforms in all camps across the country. Just a quick update from Armenia. Over the weekend, the UN Refugee Agency, with other UN agencies and non-governmental organization partners, have appealed for over $97 million to provide urgent humanitarian aid and protection to refugees and those generously hosting them in Armenia in support of the government-led response. The Armenia Emergency Refugee Response Plan was launched over the weekend. It covers relief efforts in a 6-month period until the end of March 2024. The joint plan aims to support 231,000 people, including 136,000 refugees and 95,000 members of local host communities. The plan takes into account the upcoming harsh winter months when critical support will be required. And yesterday, UNHCR said another 2 trucks with humanitarian aid arrived in Armenia, carrying essential items such as blankets, foldable beds, mattresses, hygiene items, solar lamps, and kitchen sets. We're almost there. In Kyoto, Japan, the Internet Governance Forum is underway. Today, the Secretary General addressed the forum in a video message and said we need to keep harnessing digital technologies enabled by the Internet to help deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals, take climate action, and build a better world. He also underscored the need to close the connectivity gap around the world and reinforce a human rights and human-centered approach to digital cooperation. It is imperative that the Internet, including the physical infrastructure that underpins it, remains open, secure, and accessible to all. His remarks were shared with you. And sometimes we make mistakes in this office. Last week, I erroneously announced to you that it was official World Post Day. In fact, today is World Post Day. The letter was late. Sorry. Not a pretty grim day all around. Edie.
Thank you very much, Scott. A couple of follow-ups on the Mideast. Could you give us some specifics on what the UN and the Secretary General are doing to prevent a spillover of the current conflict between Israel and Hamas into the broader region? And can you also give us some details on the size of the UN staff in Gaza? I assume that they can't leave.
Sure.
And
how? Let's stop there for now because otherwise I'll forget everything you've asked me. A couple of things. On the political activity, the Secretary General and his special coordinator have been in close contact with international and regional actors, doing whatever to further the aim of a spillover. And I think the Secretary General mentioned that in his remarks. Just to give you some details, the Secretary General has spoken to President Herzog. He expects to speak to Prime Minister Netanyahu. Also expects to speak to President Abbas today. He'll be speaking shortly with President Sisi. He already spoke to the King of Jordan, and we're also expecting him to speak to the Prime Minister of Lebanon. For his part, Mr. Veneslan has been in touch with his counterparts from the US, from the European Union, from Egypt, Qatar, and Lebanon, and others. In terms of staff members, we have 13,000 colleagues, UNRWA colleagues, in Gaza, national and international. The vast majority are national in Gaza. UNRWA has another about 4,000 staff members in the occupied West Bank. So those are plus we have, I'd say, in terms of internationals, probably about around 300 in Gaza. They are not able to. They're obviously not able to leave. They are focused on trying to do whatever they can to help the population within their mandate.
And two quick follow-ups on that. With all of the aerial bombardments going on at the moment, are they able to deliver any kind of assistance to, you're talking about trying to get 800,000 people given assistance. How are you going to be able to do that? And who will represent the UN or be on the sidelines at the Arab League foreign ministers meeting in Cairo on Wednesday?
On your last question, I don't know. I will find out if we will have if we have a presence there. On the aid, I think as I just read out, WFP is already starting to roll out food distribution. UNRWA is doing whatever it can to feeding people that are in their sheltering in their schools. Ibtisam.
Thank you, Steph. Just a quick follow-up on the last point. I thought the Israelis announced a total siege so that no one can get in and out.
Yeah, that's what I said.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, sorry.
But when you say the UNRWA is starting to, or will start
It's
to,
stuff that's pre-positioned.
Already
We have supplies that are pre-positioned. Those supplies are not endless, right? So at some point in the not too distant future, we will run out of supplies unless more supplies can come in.
And my question is, when hearing the Secretary General today, I think for a lot of Palestinians, they would say that they have the feeling that there is a double standard, the way also the UN is dealing with the Palestinian issue compared to, for example, Ukraine. And if I look at his speech, he's talking, when it comes to killed Palestinian civilians, he's talking about being alarmed. But when it comes to killed Palestinian Israeli civilians, he's condemning that. So how do you explain that?
I think the Secretary General and all of us are heartbroken at the loss of any civilian life. I mean, and you can do an analysis of the terminology that has been used over the years. The loss of civilian life is exactly that, and is to be deplored.
Yeah, but I mean, sorry, I have to push back, but you are not using the same words to describe the loss of civilian life, and that's a fact. That's
No,
not an analysis.
I'm not arguing. I'm just, we say what we say. As I said, we'll leave it to you to analyze. I feel I've answered the question to the best of my ability.
Okay, I have a follow-up regarding the school, the UNRWA school that was attacked. If I'm remembering right, UNRWA school and UN facilities are always very well known for the Israelis. So is this also the case in this? I mean, that there are civilians there?
You're very correct. There is a deconfliction process that exists. This is sadly not the first time that we're seeing that the people of Gaza are seeing this, and it's not the first time that UNRWA has had to deal with it. UN premises are indeed well known. As I said, there's a deconfliction mechanism with the Israeli authorities. We're not in a position to know whether it was targeted or if it was a mistake. What we do know is that it was hit, and that UN schools should not be hit in any way, in any manner or form. Benno, then Pam, then Deji.
Thank you, Steph. Just to follow up to some, when you say pre-positioned, you mean inside the Gaza Strip,
Yes, that's
right?
exactly what I mean.
And then my question is, the EU Commission announced that it would freeze all aid to Palestinians. I am not exactly sure if this also contains money for UNRWA. Do you?
Well, we would very much hope that the funding for UN activities in the occupied Palestinian territory and in Gaza, including UNRWA, be protected.
Does that mean you didn't get any notice so far?
I think we're seeing the developments as you're seeing them. We appeal that that funding for critical UN work, as I've just laid it out, is protected. Pam, then Benno, then Mike.
Thanks, Steph. Of the
Sorry, Deji, Benno, Benny.
whatever.
I confuse them all the time. I know.
Yeah, right. The 13,000 UNRWA staff,
Yeah.
right? Isn't that what you just said?
Yes, ma'am.
In Gaza.
Indeed.
And have they been asked to leave? I mean, is there
I mean, the vast
safety?
majority are Palestinians who
Palestinians.
live in Gaza. It's their home as well as their workplace.
Right.
No one can leave.
Is there any way to, I mean, are you doing anything to protect?
Well, we're trying to do whatever we can to keep our people safe, and our people also doing whatever they can to help the people they are mandated to help.
All right, and in terms of travel to the Middle East, needless to say, this is not the moment, but this Secretary General and previous, you were on the one that I was on with Ban Ki-moon to Khan Yunis. Is there any interest in getting to the region?
I have nothing to share with you on that at this moment.
Okay.
Deji, and then Mike.
Couple questions. First, just now the Secretary General mentioned the Hamas attack is a act of terror, so this is a terrorist attack. Is that
Those
correct?
are the words he used, yes.
Okay, so the Prime Minister of Israel, Mr. Netanyahu, said it's a war now. Does the UN think this is now a war?
I think what we are extremely concerned about is a level of tension that we've not seen before, a level of violence that we have not seen before, and a risk of spillover that we have not seen before in the recent past.
Does the Secretary General think that he's talked to President Abbas of Palestine could really give this situation under control, especially for Hamas?
I think the Secretary General needs to speak to whomever he needs to speak to, and he's doing it at his level. The special coordinator is doing the same at his level.
And one last question, a follow-up on Ibtisam's question. You know, when I came here in this room, I've never heard anything about the condemnation of the Israelis' act on the Palestinians. You only condemned the Palestinians' attack on Israel. Do you think the UN bears responsibility for today's attack because of this double standard and
No.
incompetence?
No.
But you didn't
No,
do any.
you're asking me a question,
Yeah,
Deji,
yeah,
and my
exactly.
answer is no. Mike.
Well, thank you, Steph. Two questions for you. Number one, you mentioned there's a deconfliction mechanism to try to avoid Israeli strikes on UN facilities in Gaza. Is there any kind of mechanism to ensure, because we've seen it documented, well documented in the past, that Hamas and other terror groups are not occupying those facilities at any given time? How does that work? Is there any alert between UN personnel on the ground?
We have made it perfectly clear that UN premises should obviously not be targeted, but should not be used as offensive cover, so to speak. And that message has been passed on over and over again. We're seeing it in the Palestinian camp in Lebanon, where we've called on the armed groups to leave the school.
Is there a procedure in place, though,
I
to
mean,
make
there's
sure that
messages
civilians...
it is not acceptable for UN premises to be used by armed groups to shelter weapons or to launch offensive.
Is there a procedure in place, though?
Yes, I mean, their messages are passed. We live there. Yeah.
Does the UN personnel on the ground say to those civilians, hey, this is not safe anymore because this is now occupied by militant forces? How does that work?
We asked the militant forces not to use the UN premises. We need to do whatever we can to keep those civilians who are seeking shelter in UN premises safe.
One last question
Yes,
for
sir.
you. Especially during these conflicts, proportionality is often talked about. I know the Secretary General was upset at Israeli actions in Jenin a few months ago during counterterrorism operations there against Hamas militants. 800 dead, beheadings, rapes, kidnappings of children. What does the Secretary General deem as a proportionate response to this?
It's not for him to set a proportionate response. I think if you look at what the Secretary General just said, I think you'll find the answer to your question. Nabil. And then Sherwin. And everybody, yeah.
I'm trying to read the SG's statement carefully. I don't see that he called for a ceasefire, right? Does he call for a ceasefire?
We want to see an end to this cycle of violence.
No, because in his statement he called on the Hamas and Jihad to stop their attacks and release the hostages immediately. Does he also call on Israel?
We would like to see an end to this cycle of violence.
And is the UN doing anything to mediate between the parties on the hostages now?
I think we are. I will just leave it to say that Mr. Venislan is in touch at the working level with a number of parties.
And on the political level, does the SG have a plan of action? I mean, obviously he's calling for a negotiated solution, but for the immediate situation, can you share with us if he has any plan of action, how to start de-escalation, the de-escalation?
This is, we need to see the international community and those in the region who have influence over the parties to all speak with one voice. And that's the aim of the phone calls that he's making and that Tor Venesland is making.
And my last question, the SG has already planned a trip to the region. Is he still planning to go there?
As I said, if I have any travel to share with you, I will share it with you. Sherwin Bryce Pease, South African Broadcasting.
Steph, thanks so much. The Secretary General said in his remarks that the most recent violence does not come in a vacuum. So given the years-long absence of any confidence-building measures towards direct negotiations, the growing radicalization we are seeing on both sides, the changing of the geography on the ground, on what basis does he continue to argue for a two-state solution? Asked a different way, there's a narrative out there that a two-state solution is purely becoming a fantasy. Given the changes we are seeing on the ground, on what basis do you still argue for a two-state solution?
Because we feel, it's what is in the relevant resolutions passed by the member states of this organization, and the Secretary General continues to feel it is the only way forward. Now, we're not blind. We understand that there are people creating facts on the ground, and every time those facts on the ground are changed, it pushes us in the wrong direction. It does not mean we will not stop pushing for the other direction.
Surely a policy changes if reality changes.
We adapt, but the goal, at this point, the goal for us is not changing. Stefano, and then Madame.
Thank you, Stefan. The Secretary General, when he started his mandate, he did several speeches, which one in particular, the first speech on the Security Council, he said that prevention is not merely a priority, but the priority. He was talking about prevention of conflict. After we saw in Ukraine, and after we see in the Middle East now, does he think that this policy that he announced, and he was not only talking about himself, he was talking, of course, about the UN in general, also the Security Council, is a total failure now?
The Secretary General is not the person with the finger on the trigger. He and his envoys have continued to do whatever they can to do preventive diplomacy. In the end, leaders are acting in a way that leads us to a situation that we see.
But does he think that he did everything?
I think he feels he did everything that he could have. Evelyn and then Celia.
Thank you, Steph. Do the atrocities in Israel, is there a chance that they are going to overwhelm the atrocities in Ukraine as far as contributions and humanitarian
Evelyn,
aid?
that's not a question for me to answer. That's an analysis question. We think that we should pay attention to all these crises. But how that attention is paid is often in the hands of the media. I mean, look at what I've read out today. I've read out about what's going on in Gaza, what's going on in Israel, what's going on in Ethiopia, what's going on in the DRC, what's going on in Somalia. We do our bit. Celia. I can't, I don't know. I don't know. Celia.
Talking about the DRC. Earlier, you said that armed groups in North Kivu are still fighting. The UN has been asked to leave the country. Would you say that the UN failed to stop the fighting in North Kivu?
It's a lot of UN failure questions today. I think, many of our colleagues, many peacekeepers have lost their lives in the Congo, doing their job, trying to protect civilians. UN peacekeeping is there to create a space through in which political leaders need to live up to their responsibilities. And I think in many places, those political leaders have not lived up to their responsibilities. And is that the fault of UN peacekeeping efforts? No, to paraphrase my answer to Deji. Alan, let's see if somebody can get me in a better mood.
That's right. I have a question regarding the Middle East Quartet. Are there any movements in this format, and does the ESG rely on this format in
I
this
mean,
particular?
there's been no. Let me put it this way: there's been no official movement that I'm aware of. The quartet is a useful mechanism that brings the international community together, but we are only 25% of that quartet, a mere slice. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Stefan. As you know, since last Thursday, Turkey has been bombing northeast Syria, and last night they killed 29 Kurdish internal security forces. Also, they targeted some agriculture workers, and they injured 5 women. I wonder if Secretary General had a chance to get in touch with Turkish officials recently, and plus, is UN going to send any help to build those infrastructure, civilian infrastructure in northeast Syria because of, for example, like power stations?
I need to check on the humanitarian aspect, northeast Syria. As far as I know, the Secretary General at his level has not been in touch, but we can check with Mr. Pedersen on that end. Okay. Round 2, Ibtisam.
Just a quick follow-up on the what Beno asked you about regarding the EU and them stopping or announcing that they will stop their aid. As you said, you didn't get an announcement when it comes to the UN, but I guess my question is, even if they will not stop the aid to the UN, they will stop it, it seems to be to NGOs, local NGOs. Do you consider this as being part of collective punishment?
I think those men, women, and children, and those people who often live in the most vulnerable conditions, who rely on humanitarian aid, who are the least responsible for the situation, should not pay a price.
Question about Syria and cross-border, because there is the 2 other cross-borders that they will expire in, I think, in a month. The Bab al-Salam and...
It's a lifetime.
Yeah. Any updates there?
I will check. I don't mean to minimize it, but I will check. Benno, then Pam.
Maybe I'd try a Security Council failure question then.
I will not. That's not for me to.
Well, does the SG have a comment or like a message to the Security Council? They met yesterday on the Middle East, and obviously there was no outcome. I think they didn't try to get an outcome, to have an outcome, but still, there must be maybe a message from the SG to the Council.
The SG's message, Security Council, is the same as it always has, is that a strong and unified Security Council helps all of us in our collective action to avoid further violence or to improve situation around the world. Pamela.
Thank you, Steph. You mentioned that the SG spoke with Sisi and Abbas and Herzog and Lebanon. I mean, he spoke with a lot of people.
I mentioned that he spoke to some and he will speak to others.
Yes.
That's in my list.
Can you give us some sense? I mean, I know there are readouts, but what are the world leaders in the region saying about,
listen, I struggle enough. I struggle enough to speak on behalf of the Secretary General. I cannot speak on behalf of his interlocutors.
No, but what are they telling him?
Listen, you know how much the Secretary General prizes discretion, and how much I prize my job. So, Deji.
I'll have an easier question. Today, we discovered that the NYPD is actually strengthening security around the United Nations headquarters. Is that related to what the situation in Palestine is?
I think you need to ask them. We rely and are extremely grateful for what the NYPD does for us. I mean, we've seen, I think, over the weekend, there were counter demonstrations not far from here. So the NYPD does to keep whatever it needs to do to keep all of us safe. Stefano.
Yes, follow up on what just Pam asked. Did the Secretary General did he speak or intend to speak with President Biden, and will he ask him to intervene in the situation about the sparing of civilians in this fighting?
The Secretary General's calls right now are focused to political leaders in the region. Edie, and then I'm definitely out of here and leaving you in Monica's hands.
On Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Has the UN been able to get its people into this area of Herat, which is not so easy to get to?
We're trying to send an assessment team there. The transport and access are always a little challenging. We'll try to get, as soon as we have more info, I'll let you know. Monica, over to you.
Thank you so much, Steph. Good afternoon, everyone. I have 3 notes for you today. I know everybody's very busy. I saw you working hard yesterday as I was also monitoring we were all monitoring the meeting in the Security Council. So let's get started. The President of the General Assembly, Mr. Dennis Francis, has asked for an immediate cessation of violence in Israel and Gaza after the attacks of 7th October against Israel. The PGA is appalled by the kidnapping of civilians and called for an immediate release of all people who were taken hostages. He urges all parties and key actors to exercise maximum restraint and engage in diplomatic efforts to de-escalate the situation and to protect civilians. He stresses that the international law must be fully respected. The attacks by Hamas on Saturday resulted in an escalation that left hundreds dead and scores more wounded in Israel and the state of Palestine. The PGA joins the Secretary General in stating unequivocally that violence is not a viable path forward. It offers neither sustainable peace nor prosperity for any involved. This is a path that has proven to lead only to more bloodshed, more conflict, and more tragedy. In most cases, these are innocent citizens. We're talking about women, men, children, who are paying the price. Mr. Francis calls for all parties to exercise maximum restraint and for all stakeholders to engage in diplomatic discussions, to de-escalate the situation, to protect civilians, and to chart a path to a two-state solution that offers peace, progress, and prosperity for all. You will remember that on Saturday, shortly after the assault by Hamas, Mr. Francis issued a statement on his account on the social media platform X, strongly condemning the attack. The J leader has called on the international community to stand with the Afghan people after the 6.3 magnitude earthquake in the Herat province on Saturday in Afghanistan. Media reports indicate that at least 2,000 people died in the disaster. Mr. Dennis Francis expressed his deepest condolences to the families of the victims and a speedy recovery to those injured. The President is deeply concerned about the impact of this devastating earthquake, which hit a region of the country that has already suffered from the consequences of conflict, drought, and food insecurity. The President expresses his solidarity with the people of Afghanistan and joins the calls to scale up emergency humanitarian assistance as aid workers are searching for survivors. He stresses that early action in situations like this is crucial to save lives and provide essential services for those affected. And tomorrow, for your diaries, 10th of October at 10 a.m., the General Assembly will hold the election for new members of the Human Rights Council. PJ Dennis Francis will chair the meeting in accordance with the rules of procedure of the General Assembly. After an introduction, member states will cast their votes in a secret ballot. President Francis will then announce the results of the election. No statements from member states are expected. In order to be elected to the Council, each candidate must have at least 97 votes, which is the absolute majority of votes required. The 15 elected members will serve for a period of 3 years. We are talking here about 2024 to 2026. There are 4 vacant seats for the African region and 4 candidates: Burundi, Côte d'Ivoire, Ghana, and Malawi. The Asia-Pacific states have 4 seats and 4 candidates: China, Indonesia, Japan, and Kuwait. In the group of Eastern European states, there are 2 vacant seats and 3 candidates: Albania, Bulgaria, and the Russian Federation. On Latin American, Caribbean states, there are 3 vacant seats and 4 candidates: Brazil, Cuba, Dominican Republic, and Peru. The last group of Western European and other states has 2 seats and 2 candidates: France and Netherlands. So I think by the time we meet tomorrow, we may have a result for you. We'll see. And finally, on the PJ's agenda today, he received the permanent representative of Barbados, His Excellency Mr. Francois Jackman, before addressing the 5th committee, as you may know by now, and the 2nd committee in separate meetings. He also received the SG's personal envoy for Mozambique, Mr. Mirko Manzoni. As we speak, the PJ is receiving in his office the Ombudsman of the International Institute, Ms. Gabi Schwartz. Later today, he will take part in a video conference with the Independent International Commission of Inquiry on the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem and Israel. Late afternoon, Mr. Dennis Francis will hold a meeting with the USG for Peace Operations, Jean-Pierre Lacroix. My friends, this is all for today. Do you have anything? Edie, how are you?
Fine, thank you, Monica. Has any UN member state asked for a General Assembly meeting on Hamas's invasion of Israel and Israel's declaration of war against Hamas?
Nothing has come our way, but doesn't mean that it couldn't happen anytime. Thank you. Pam, how are you?
Hi.
Mm-hmm.
Good to see you here yesterday.
Good to see you too.
Thank you, Monica. The PGA statement was, as you said, very close to the Secretary General's in condemning the attacks, but he didn't use the word terror, calling it a terror attack, which the SG did. Is there, does he not believe it is, or is that just a different choice? Thank you.
No, I don't think that is the question. The PJ is appalled by this attack, and his reaction on Saturday, shortly after it happened, also translates his reaction to it. What I think right now, and we spoke this morning, because of course we meet every morning, and he also is stressing how concerned he is with the situation of the civilians, the people who were kidnapped, people who are being held against their will. And that's why in his statement he makes clear that all the hostages have to be released immediately.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
Is he having conversations with regional world leaders about the issue, and who in particular?
The PJs.
Thank you.
Yeah, the PJs. I don't have any update for you on this right now, as it is an evolving topic right now, or situation. But the PJ has his office open to all who wants to speak to him. He's very concerned about this. He is asking for a cessation of hostilities, because we are having, as we speak, people being targeted. And it doesn't matter where they're from, people being targeted. We're talking about women, men, children, elderly people. So he would like to see an end of it, to this. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone? Stefano, go ahead.
Thank you, Monica. Does the President of the General Assembly think that this crisis could have been prevented somehow, some way, if in the months prior or years prior, something will have happened that didn't happen?
Yeah. Well, the president, I think you were here, right, when we had the press conference. The president has made clear his stance when it comes to the Middle East. Yeah, that resolutions previously approved in this House, and we are talking about the Security Council, we're talking about the General Assembly, we're talking about other instances, are there to be abide by. People have to abide by these resolutions. That's what I would like to say. And he was very clear here when he said that he not only supports these resolutions, that they have to be implemented, but that his clear vision or opinion on this is that only two-state solution that brings to peace of two states living peacefully side by side, coexisting peacefully, is the way forward for the situation. However, right now, we are talking about an attack that just happened on Saturday, right? So I think we have two situations here, an evolving situation, a situation that has been there for decades and that have been dealt with in diplomatic ways when we're talking about the resolutions. But also we have a situation of an attack that happened on Saturday, an unprovoked, unexpected attack. We all have seen the images on the media, traditional media or social media. I think the PJ was very clear in his statement. There must be an immediate cessation of violence, and all sides need to find a path to a durable, peaceful solution. That's what we have to do. As we speak, we are still dealing with a very grave, terrible, serious situation of people being in terrible conditions, right? And I think right now, what he's asking for is very clear. Stop all violence, and let's find a path to peace and to the end of the violence. Yes. Okay, anything else? If not, I would say thank you so much for staying this late, and I see you tomorrow. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, today is Indigenous Peoples Day, and the Cherokee Museum right here in the Carolinas is making a big announcement. I got the chance to travel to Cherokee and hear about the progress that's being made and their goals for the future.
The Museum of the Cherokee Indian is one of the oldest tribal museums in the country. Founded in 1948, the last time the museum had a major renovation was back in 1998, and now they're getting ready for another one, as well as a name change.
It's a privilege and an honor to be on our ancestral homelands, and we feel fortunate every day that we do have that responsibility, but we want to make sure that folks, in the world understand that we are one people.
With 3 federally recognized Cherokee tribes, Executive Director Shana Bushyhead Condell says the museum will now be called